Okay, we're live.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of EduWiki Live, hosted by the education team at the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm Nicole Saad. I lead the education team here at the Wikimedia Foundation, and I'm joined today by some of our colleagues, amazing volunteers, and our special guest, Javiera Atenas, who is a PhD in education and has wide-reaching and expansive experience in open education and data literacy in higher education. So we're so excited to talk to her today. So first, we're going to just let everyone who's in the conversation today introduce themselves. And then we will have a short presentation from our guest speaker. And then we'll have an active question and answer session. Our volunteers today have prepared some questions, and we'll also be fielding questions from you, the audience, on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So throughout this entire presentation and conversation, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to type them in the chat, and we will surface your questions during the Q&A session. So with all of that, I will pass the mic to Javiera to introduce herself.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Javiera Atenas. I'm a senior lecturer in learning and teaching enhancement at the University of Suffolk in England. I'm also a member of the UNESCO Coalition for Open Education. I do bits and bobs in open education and open education policy, in critical data literacy here and there. My expertise is mostly information and information architecture, information management, but I'm also, my role is to develop literacies in academic practice for academics at, of course, at university level. So yeah, that's what I do, and I'm really thankful for this invitation.
Thank you. Sailesh, do you want to introduce yourself and then our volunteers here today?
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Sailesh Patnaik. I'm a program officer with the education team, and I manage the community organizing site for the team. And with such programs like EduWiki Live, EduWiki Week, and the regional meetings, we have two amazing volunteers with us today. They're also part of the EduWiki outreach collaborators. I'm gonna ask them to talk a bit about themselves. Brahim.
Thank you, Sailesh. Hi, everyone. I am Brahim Faraji from Oujda, from Morocco. I am, as Sailesh said, a world community specialist for MENA region and education program coordinator for Moroccan user group and local coordinator for the project, reading the amazing project of reading Wikipedia in the classroom. We are glad to receive Dr. Atera. And yes, we are glad and excited to learn from her. So I pass the mic to Sandeep or Sailesh.
Thanks, Rahim. Hi, everyone. My name is Sandeep Kaur. I'm from India. I'm a teacher and my major subjects are science and education. Currently, I'm pursuing doctorate in education. I have joined this movement since 2019 and set up a wiki club in my institute where we organize various training activities and workshop of Wikipedia. Currently, I'm in the position of Education Community Specialist South Asia, and also I'm a certified trainer of reading Wikipedia in the classroom. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandeep. Oh.
That's okay, Sailesh. Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks, Brahim, and everyone. So now we're really excited to hear from our guest speaker today, Javiera. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to start telling you that I'm a Wikimedia user, but not a producer. So I'm seeking for the site that is someone that keeps using the resources, everything that basically this community produces, but I'm not part of the community whatsoever. So my perspective as an open educator and someone that basically helps developing capacities in academic practice is to think about how Wikimedia has helped me firsthand to develop my own practices, and also how I use Wikimedia to advise my fellow colleagues and my fellow academics into developing good practice in learning and teaching. So I have a very short presentation because I really want to open the discussion from saying the voices of from hearing from you on the group that really works with Wikimedia. Mine is like the work that I do from like the front, like the front of what you produce. I don't know what's going on the back. So let me share my screen with you. Can you see it? Yeah, right. So I see Wikimedia as a big big space, big arena, as a place where I tend to bridge my work between open and critical education. Okay. Wikimedia, including images, including the data, including the articles in Wikipedia, and all the a lot of things you do. For me, it's kind of the space where you can find what you need to explain a situation. You can help, you can guide your students to build things with what you as a community have already produced, to evaluate the quality of information, to enhance the quality of information, to work with different sorts of resources, to get different angles on one story, for example. And so for me, it's kind of a portal that can lead to develop critical thinking and can lead to develop open pedagogies. And I think both have a really important level of intersection, because you cannot be open if you're not critical, but you cannot be critical to the system if you are not happy to adopt an open education approach. So I think this is kind of the arena where we can start catalyzing, mobilizing educators into becoming open and critical. And it can be the first and the last step in a very big process. So when we think about open and critical education, we think about, for example, in the social politics of education, and I work in higher education. I have to be very honest in here. I don't know nothing about K-12, for example, or primary and secondary education, and I'm very respectful of that space. As an academic in academic practice, I cannot advise on what to do with school children because that's not my area of expertise. So I will try to keep this discussion on higher education, and I will try to learn as much as I can from the educators in this community that work in the school system, okay? But for me to think about in academic practice, how to think about open and critical education is to draw on the concept of the education should recognize and challenge power dynamics. And that comes from a critical perspective. So Freire, Giroux, Foucault, and to enable students, which technically are adults, to become a critical and committed citizenry that can deepen and expand the participation in the society to further support democracy. The role of the university is not just create technical skills, develop technical skills. Most of actually public universities have a social responsibility. And one of the elements of social responsibility is to develop society for democracy. So when we think about the work that educators and researchers do in the academic context, we need to think about what is the impact that such practices had on the society. So when we think about open access, for example, why open access is so important these days, because basically as it's funded with public funds, research needs to be given back to the society. And this is one of the principal concepts of, ideas of retributive justice, not just social justice, it's just retribution to the society. The society is funding your work. Therefore, you need to give your work back to society in a way that people can understand it. Sometimes the language that we use in academia is convoluted and it's complicated and it's not friendly, it's not society friendly. This is where Wikipedia, for example, has a very, very important space. How we translate academic research written in academic language with all the conundrums and all the Latin that we love to put into a writing. how we humanize this discourse, and for example, turning up into a Wikipedia article that people can understand it. So when we do a discovery in biology, when we do a discovery in biochemistry, when we do a discovery in astrophysics, people, yeah, I cannot even read their papers. I'm not qualified. I don't have the skills to read certain level of scientific papers. I roughly understand what they say, but sometimes even a struggle for me. So to understand what these research teams are trying to say, I have to go to Wikipedia and read it in a human language. This is, for example, what is important to have Wikimedia connected, and Wikipedia in general, Wikipedia connected with academic research. So, and that gives the people the space to critically think about the advancements and the challenges that the society is facing. So how do I see this map? Yeah, in Wikimedia and education, but please think it is just, for me, education is just higher education sector. How is kind of the relationship between Wikimedia open science and kind of the development of open research projects? How students from a very early stage in their academic practice, so let's say first year or first year in university, students can start developing this sense of like becoming researchers. And they could do it through the data and the materials that Wikimedia produces. And includes, for example, using Wikidata, of course, because it's open data, Wikidata to start developing the basic research skills that students need to survive in academic practice. But it's also all the work and all the importance. When we think about open science, we tend to think of like very heavy weight science, like chemistry, physics. But when do we think about Wikimedia and the humanities, I always immediately think about digital humanities. This is actually one of the main spaces for open scientists in the humanities and social science fields, because this is kind of a portal that allows easing the communication and kind of showing the work in a very straightforward manner. So there is a quite an interesting symbiosis between digital humanities, Wikimedia, and the GLAM sector. And I think this is key in higher education. But also think about like the importance of open access has in between the mediation between Wikimedia and higher education. When you write an article for Wikimedia, the best thing you can do is to validate your claims or put the evidence of the things that you're saying grounded on research. But how can people use that research if the research is kept under paywall? So it's kind of favoring the use of open access research, open published research to frame the evidence on the articles that people is writing. And also to have, for example, the Wikimedia collections, because not everything open access is just a paper. It's also all the digital collection, all the digital heritage. The digitization of the heritage is really important, and this is licensed as it was like an open artifact. And that links very nicely with, for example, using Wikipedia itself, Wikimedia itself as an OER is the biggest OER in the world. It's the thing that we can actually use for teaching at any point. How we embed not just the OER, the concept of the resource, but also the concept of practices within open education. It's a space that allows collaboration, allows exchange of practice. So what I do here today, I actually learned it from what the Scottish did a couple of years ago. And then the same thing that I'm doing now can be replicated in Brazil, can be replicated in India, because there is a solid space for collaboration. So it has to be in the sense of collaboration with the work that citizen science do, bringing people in to collaborate, develop resources, develop information using Wikimedia and Wikipedia resources to, for example, explain concepts and ideas around democracy that can be difficult for people to understand, because they normally they are kept under the gates of like wisdom. So people don't have the spaces and access to get simplified information to make informed decisions in the context of democracy. And also we think about, well, what about like open government? What open government has to do with all this? There is a space where communities, again, in a citizen science approach and in a digital and humanity approach, and in a way of like when we talk about open educational practices, we can put up the commitments for countries within education and open government, for example, so people know that whatever we do in Wikimedia may have an impact into kind of reflecting what the commitments in open governance are trying to do in relation, for example, with use of data and developing data literacies for participation in the society, in an open society. And of course, there is the work that Open Glam does. So Open Glam, being this community that produces content from museums and heritage and collection, it's like Wikimedia is the platform to provide open licensed content of curated collections, curated heritage and museum collections that can be used as OER if they're created in a way that have an educational value behind them or an educational explanation. So this is basically how I see this ecosystem of potential practices. In the case of university education, so we have at my university in our strategic work, and then in our strategy that goes until next year, so we have to kind of rework a strategy in a post-pandemic context. But I think for sure we're going to keep these. What we do is we work in 3 phases across the 3 years of an undergrad program. The first level is level 4. So first year 1 is level 4 in the UK, just to make things confusing, because it's the UK, we like to make things confusing. So level 4 is level 4 is year 1 of university education. So in this case, we work with students in a very, very guided way. We help them structuring plans for them to study. We guide them in the learning processes. But when they move to 2nd year, we start enabling them to become peer learners. So they work with their peers, they work with the community, they work with others in the university. And also, of course, with staff support, but mostly like enabling them to become the owners of their own learning as part of a community practice. And this is, for example, where Wikimedia has a very good impact when we ask them to do things, editing articles, using data, but work with peers, because it's kind of the sense of community work that is really important. And of course, when they move to level 6, which is the final year of an undergrad program in the UK, students become independent learners. And this is where, for example, they are able to assess the quality of an article and improve the article, or when they are able to gather data and create data sets, and of course, cross data from Wikimedia. And you ask me why she mentions data so much, because I think one of the key elements in Wikimedia is the quality and accessibility of the data that you have produced as Wikidata. And we think about like open pedagogies as a driver to develop critical thinking skills and critical skills. But for me, this is part of the work I do. The adoption of open data as an OER creates this sense of social political awareness. So, and can enable critical thinking. So when people don't work with processed information as would be an article, but they work with the raw data, they work with the same data or the same information that policymakers and researchers do. So increases the sense of ownership of your own learning. So for example, when they work with data and thinking about like the state of critical thinking, they can determine a hypothesis that guide decisions and actions. They can verify the accuracy of the assumptions, analyzing different perspectives through the data and not relying on what others have processed in the case of like an article. And also make informed decisions in regards with the evidence and the research that they have collected when they want to kind of analyze their data. That's why Wikidata is such a valuable resource to develop critical thinking and critical capacities in higher education. When we think about data literacy, we think about the ability to understand, create, and communicate data as information, although it's way more complex. If it was as simple as understand, create, and communicate data, people would be data literacy by now. Data as is a socio-technical construct, comes with biases, is not neutral, it's actually very political. So it's an element that requires to think carefully about what you do with the data and how you portray the subjects. In the data you have collected, for example, where you're working with community data, when you're working with data from people. And also the communities that live around the data you're portraying. Sometimes you don't talk about the people, but you talk about the territories. And this is quite interesting on the work, for example, that here Chicas do. They use data to reflect the society from a very kind of humanized perspective. And they have an approach in which they develop data literacy in the communities, working closely with the people that will be affected by mapping, for example, because mapping is a political instrument as well. So with my colleagues, so Leo and Leo Havemann and Kristen Timmerman, we have developed this little framework on critical data literacy. There has components of data feminism, of research ethics, but also components of community and open science and citizen science work. So when we think about developing a project, for example, using Wikidata with students in academic practice, we think, or we actually with scholars when we're teaching them basics of data literacy, because not every academic is very, very data literate. We think about how the work with Wikimedia and the work with open data in general can help them to challenge power structure, how help them to address equality and promote sovereignty. And in this case, sovereignty is mostly for people working with vulnerable communities. They have the right to own their own data. And that includes, for example, indigenous data. You cannot just go and collect the data from a community without giving them the right to basically be sovereign about the data and the information that you have about them. And that means include and promote fairness. You have to recognize the voices of the people and actually the dignity of the people that you are collecting data about, and the territories. So it's not just the people, it's also the territories. Thus, you have to address biases. When you look at the data, you can spot there are always some biases. Data cannot be neutral because it's human-made. It comes with errors. That's what we are. So we need to think about principles of do no harm, that respect privacy and respect autonomy. And this is something that can be enabled and challenged and actually created through Wikidata. And I think this is why it's such an important asset, not just at research level, but also in the development of research skills. I wish, for example, more data science programs had a component of data ethics. And the first approach to data was community-created data, which is the case of Wikidata. Because this is data created independently by a group of people. Therefore, you can spot how communities work together and which are the overarching ethical principles of such communities, because that can give potential future data scientists a perspective of the value of community in preventing mishandles of data. So just to close down, I just want to show you or share with you a little rubric that we did a few years ago with Leo on how you can bring in data, and in this case, Wikidata as OER in the case of university teaching, so at undergrad and postgraduate level, and how you can start from like inviting subject and data experts to discuss with the students about global and local issues, to end up working with your students writing dissertations led through data, and a way to, for example, publish the findings of their master's or undergraduate dissertations in an open format, which actually could be a Wikimedia article. Thinking about the work that you can do with students in academic practice, with other colleagues, with learning technologies, with librarians, is the Scottish Accused Witches, led by the University of Edinburgh. They have Wikimedia in residence, of course. Even they had someone that used to be on the board until a week ago, Lorna Campbell, who is actually one of the lead promoters of the use of Wikipedia as Wikimedia as an OER in the UK and Europe context. So anything that Lorna says is true, because She actually is the one that knows most about how to enable Wikipedia as a space for critical and open literacies. And what they've done is like through the archives and through data that they had collected, national archives and data that collected, they created this map of women accused of witchcraft in Scotland. And they wrote portraits about their life, who they were, why they were murdered, and it helps you first recover the historical memory of women that are actually being wiped out of from the history. There were just numbers, but also to explain the context of like the horrors of massive murder in the case of witchcraft, and bring back the memories into something tangible that is co-created and democratically co-created through an open education approach, which is basically using Wikidata and Wikimedia as an main portal to work with your students in recovering historical memory. So that's me. Hopefully that will mean the summer very soon, in like a couple of weeks, and we go back to that very same place. So I really need to go to the beach now. But yeah, that's me, and thanks so much for inviting me. I'm here for any questions.
Thanks, Javiera. That was really great. We were all like drooling over this graphic that you have of like Wikimedia and like all of these dimensions. You're like, oh, it's like a really great visualization of this thing that we talk about all the time. So thanks for that. We had some folks in the chat asking if you would be willing to share these slides so they can reference them.
Of course, they're open licensed. So I'll send them by email whenever you want. Or tell me where to send them.
Wonderful. So I'm going to pass the floor to Brahim and Sandeep, who will have some questions. Brahim, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, sorry, I was struggling with the mouse. So thank you, Doctor, for your presentation is so rich. So we have prepared some question. So the first question is, how has the pandemic changed the urgency of your work around the data literacy?
Sorry, I missed the sound for a second.
Okay. So I said, how has the pandemic changed your urgency of your work around the data literacy?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Pre-pandemic, we were exposed to graphs and numbers, mostly in political election context. Even though we all see it all the time, we've never been exposed to statistics, infographics, numbers, and curves, and increase and medians every single day at 8 p.m. when the governments were telling us how much infections were rising or decreasing. So basically, the only times where like we've been exposed to statistics daily before the pandemic were in the context of political elections or in the context of football matches to see whether you get in or out of the World Cup. Everyone became a statistician just when you were counting, like scratching up the numbers for getting into the World Cup. I'm Chilean, and I think we are one of the countries where like you basically scratching to get in every single World Cup if we manage to get in. So I think this is the time where people are like, oh yeah, this is the numbers, this is the probabilities and the possibilities, and this is the curve, and if they lost this match and if they win this match, we can get in. But normally there is no people being exposed to statistics as brutally as we will. So we have been, hopefully we will never will ever again, but as we've been through the pandemic, every single TV channel, every single day for the last 2 years was showing numbers and curves and things and that and what we were doing, what we were doing. Then biostatisticians were talking about, and then you have like the language of the biostatistician, then you have the language of the government. Sometimes their statistics didn't match, and people need to become very critical about the decisions that the government were making. So basically, you all became evidence-based policy makers, because we had a strong opinion of policy for countries, mask or no mask, vaccine or no vaccine, and why they were doing this, why they're not doing that. And this is a trigger for capitalizing the value of like developing data literacy. Normally data literacy will think about like something that you need to know just to make sure that you vote to the right group, or you don't get manipulated, because data is kind of the instrument for political manipulation. Now it's a huge demand, but it's a huge demand also in something, of course, critical data literacy, not just data literacy, but critical data literacy and also data ethics, because we've seen exponentially how much harm data can do if people don't keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
And it's not data can do it, it's people that manage the data can do if we don't keep an eye on them, basically. The data, we cannot blame the data here.
Yes, thank you. And another question or another challenge that I want your advice is how is the secret, or what is the best way to get a teacher involved in OER or open data legacy contributor or users? So how we can convince our teacher in our community to get involved, to use open data literacy or open data tools, or to contribute as community or as teacher?
I think you're a step ahead of the rest of like groups of academics, because people already know what open practices mean by being a Wikimedia educator, a wiki educator, or have some involvement with the concept of openness. The challenge is the people that fear openness. It's like, why do I have to share anything? People would just steal from me. It's like, no, nobody will steal from you. Maybe they want to share what you do because they think it's great, but nobody will steal from you. If someone wants to steal from you, they're going to do it regardless of the licensing that you put, because people that plagiarize this just unethical. They just don't care about what you do, the kind of license you put. You're going to copy and paste anyway. So for me, the best way to approach this is to have a theme, is to have a challenge, is to have a cohesive practice. So where you connect digital content, for example, digital collections, you connect articles, and you connect data. So is to give, for example, the teachers a challenge to work with the students. And for example, involve the museums. So students studying a museum or a specific period of time in a specific context. So they have to dig up the data, they have to create articles about the paintings or the artifacts. They need to kind of explain situations, historical facts, amend articles, create biographies, and then gather all these biographies and create maps, for example, using the data that they gather from those biographies. So this is kind of a little way to make, it's not the data, it's the sense of ownership of your own knowledge, of your own learning. And it's not just about like, oh, I'm data literate. You need to be more than data literate. You need to be able to communicate the data effectively. And the way to do it is to create projects for people. And they feel proud of what they've done. Look what we've done. We put this map together. And like the witch thing is like flagship project, because it's amazing. And every shop that they show it, you can see the smiles on their face, how much they learn, how much the community learn, how much not just the university gains, but also the how much they put the archives to work, and how much the entire Scotland won through the recuperation of the historical memory through that.
Okay, thank you so much. I will pass the mic to Sandeep if she has a question too.
Thanks, Brian. My question is, now in the present time, everybody knows how to use the technology and the benefits of online learning and online courses. But if we talk about the pandemic period, it taught us a limitation of technology mediated learning. We feel in that time that there is no substitute for educators and learners. What do you think, or give some aspects that online learning or digital education is better or productive than offline learning?
No, it's not better. Absolutely not. It's not better. The mediation could enable certain gains in certain communities. But we cannot say, oh, one is better than the other. It needs to be a balanced approach to delivery of teaching, but also to engagement with learners. And even though we say, okay, it works in this community, it might not work for everyone in the community. I don't like the concept of digital poverty because there's no such thing as digital poverty. There is poverty. That's it. Okay. Someone is struggling with a computer, quite likely struggling with food and energy at the same time. So when people talk about digital poverty, it's about like, oh, maybe the laptop doesn't work, but the house is warm and the food is warm. Not really. So we need to think about how do we enable learning through different media and different channels with the idea of not leaving anyone behind. There is no argument. It's like, oh, open education is, online education is better than face-to-face education. In certain contexts, open education can be a catalyzer of education and getting the education you need. For example, when you live in a very remote community, and Australia is a good example of that, when they kind of deployed big chunks of online education because they had to connect kind of rural communities. But in that case, the rural communities need to have the electricity and the people need to have the livelihood to be able to study. So when we think about how people can do things digitally as the only way of learning, they can actually work with Wikimedia and with open resources offline. And we need to, as communities of open education, different communities, we need to create the possibilities for communities also to work offline with content that was designed for digital work. So being able to, having teachers being able to print out things, to do things by hand, create artifacts that then can be digitized. But I will never argue, I will never promote online education as the best route because it's really good. It's really good, don't take me wrong, but it needs to be set up in a very, very specific context.
Can I ask one more question?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the present scenario, we focus on the quality-based education. We talk about development, we talk about skills, proper resources, teaching and learning enhancement. But when we read about the taxonomies, we read about the knowledge, understanding, and application are mainly based on the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the active learning strategies, active learning and teaching strategies for deep engagement?
Again, context. We can only achieve deep engagement in thinking like very, very easily in the pyramid of Maslow, the pyramid of needs. When people have the basic needs covered up, it's easily engaged in learning. So if we put all our effort as educators and as academics, in my case, to keep the students engaged, we're not thinking of elements that are related with pedagogy of care, and pedagogy of care is not related with KPIs. We need to make sure that our students are safe, are fed, are warm, are comfortable, are in a space where they can learn their best, rather than think about how to keep engagement. How can keep the engagement? They're not engaging. The data is telling me they're not engaging. Well, very likely they're not engaging because they're going through loads of things. So I'll put pedagogies of care before or as kind of the ground for developing learning and teaching activities, because also depending of the activities or the elements of engagement we want to do, we might leave behind students. They have learning disabilities, so it can be a very ableist approach. And the only way that we can balance that is ethics of care, pedagogies of care, and make sure that we work for our community to nurture them rather than ensure that they get the points they need to get. I'm being very critical here. Sorry for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brahim and Sandeep, for your questions. And thank you, Javiera, for your great answers. We're very aligned around these approaches. And the thing that we always communicate to our community, what we call the EduWiki community of practice, is that context is key, and you have to really look at, what you have in front of you to be able to develop an intervention that's, relevant. So something that is going to work in Scotland is not going to work in Ghana, for example. And I have a kind of a question around that in terms of data literacy. I think one of the struggles that we have, not only with Wikidata, I think across our projects, is that the readiness for contribution is usually quite low, especially in parts of the world where maybe people are only using mobile phones to access the internet, and contributing on a mobile phone is usually more challenging than contributing on a desktop. And so developing like those digital literacy skills before asking people to contribute, and also like going through critical thinking and just learning how Wikimedia works is important before we ask them to contribute. And that's what our program Reading Wikipedia in the Classroom does. And Brahim and Sandeep are both certified trainers in Reading Wikipedia in the classroom. So they've already had that practice. But in terms of data literacy, I wonder if there is, or what does scaffolding look like for students and professors whose level of data literacy might inhibit them from like understanding how to contribute or participate? And are there any frameworks for data literacy that our community could reference? Like, this is what you need to do before you do this and this. Is there anything like that we could use as a reference?
I did a framework. I still use it. I did a framework. So
wonderful.
I'm very proud of the framework that we did. It's often published. I'm going to share the link with you. It's on a paper that we published in 2015 in Open Praxis. And we had, of course, again, thinking about university level, we thought about having the small rubric, because it needs to be very simple to start with, about critical thinking, data analysis skills, data curation, data information management, data mining, visualization, research, and statistical skills, because I think they're all interweaved in a way of another. And also, we have the table that I showed you about civic engagement through data, which I think it's key in the sense of developing skills for academics. And then we wrote another paper, because that's what we do for a living. We write papers about critical data literacies for academics. So let me try to dig out the reference, which is basically guidance for universities to create academic development programs on, let me see, Timmerman, for so academic development programs in the higher education sector for academics to develop curriculum and also their own data literacies. So here is the link. Of course, again, open access paper. So this is kind of the frameworks, and also the framework that I showed you not long ago. We did a project called Data Praxis. Let me try to dig out. So I've written, my work in this project was to develop the content, the practical content for, and the research for this project. It's called datapraxis.net. And this is where we have like we did like a project on critical data literacy for academics. So academics didn't come from the data sector. I was the lead researcher for this project. So basically all the content of the materials, it's called modules. So critical data studies, what is open data, the data fight present and future, data agency, data justice, data agency has been written by me, data justice has been written by someone else. So we have some content in Spanish as well. So I wrote about critical data studies to data agency and sovereignty. And we have some more papers coming up very soon, I hope, with Leo and Chris.
That's great. That's also helpful. I wasn't expecting to get so many great resources with that question. So thanks for sharing all of that.
I've been working for a while doing this, so I think I pretty some stuff. You won't give me a professorship, but hey, keep publishing.
I mean, we can always, try to bump up the visibility on our end with all of these things, because I think that our community will very much appreciate them. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I have one that was surfaced in the YouTube chat. So we wonder if you could tell us maybe like a personal anecdote or story around, how working with open pedagogies has changed how your students like interact with knowledge, or like if there's like one particular like case that comes to mind for you where you saw how this approach has changed how students approach information or have developed critical literacies.
Okay, so I have two cases. I was teaching at a university in London at the time, and it was a course in communication studies, and I ended up, because someone fell ill and I had to cover, so I ended up giving this course, and it was kind of about effective communication of social in the social sciences. Not my year of study, so I had to study really hard to manage to put the course together. And I decided to go through like the school of data resources, and I was like, okay, if you're going to communicate information effectively, I'm going to go full ballistic open data and data. They won't sack me because they're stuck with me for this semester. Sorry for that. You need help. Here I am. I'll do whatever. And we work with students that didn't, mostly journalism and history. They were doing this masters in communication and in social sciences. They didn't know anything about maths and statistics. They were actually freaked out by numbers. And my textbook, because I'm completely against textbooks, but that's another chapter of these meetings. It was School of Data. Okay, so we went through School of Data. We came with projects, and we said, okay, let's challenge preconceptions about things that the numbers said happening, or let's challenge the stories. Let's do something to show that we can communicate something difficult or a difficult narrative using data. So we have two great cases in that group. One decided to compare data from Pakistan and Brazil in regards with education and incarceration, because there is this saying around that if you have most people like higher levels of schooling, you will reduce crime, right? So Brazil, Pakistan have the same amount of people, roughly the same weather, roughly. So he went, and the same levels of literacy, roughly. He went and compared. And it was quite interesting that he saw like Brazil has a very high level of scholarization because people go to school more than in Pakistan, although it has a way higher rate of crime than Pakistan. So he was writing an analysis of like why this is happening, what are kind of the social constructs that is preventing crime happening in Pakistan. But actually, this cannot be an argument not to increase the scholarization of Pakistani children. So he wrote a very nice article in which we are basically comparing educational and crime data, which I found really interesting because normally it is when you use those sort of data, you kind of tend up punishing one group and like portraying them very unfairly. In this case, was no unfair portraying. It was like, this is the data. Actually, they rank higher in both of the cases, but actually they have way higher crime. And it's because all the socioeconomic factors. So yeah, there was a very nice article. And the other one that was quite interesting, again, another Pakistani student by coincidence, he did a map of honor crimes. So he dug up data that wasn't open. So he sat down, pull up newspapers data, and create a heat map of where women were most at risk. And then he sent and he wrote an article about it. He sent the article to Association of Women, and then more women started participating, and the map grew up. And then, of course, I left and the semester was over, but this is kind of people, and they were so proud. Everyone, it was a very good outcome in general. Everyone did very good project, but these two people were so proud because they never thought that they can actually change constructs in their country. So yeah, and I'm still proud of their work.
Those are amazing stories. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. It's really great to, we talk about like the theory and the practice, but it's also like really good to hear, the impact on individuals, because that's usually like, it's always very motivating for me when I see students, how they are able to actually produce something or change something based on the learning. So that's really wonderful. Brahim, Sandeep, do you have one last question?
For me, I wanted to hear another story, but with the Wikimedian community, if there is.
My only interaction with the Wikimedia community has been on International Women's Day. I'm always there for the hackathons on International Women's Day, and I'm not the best editing. I must say that like I'm very limited on my editing skills. I'm trying to improve though. But we work with academics, female academics, students, and groups in the community to create biographies, to create maps, to kind of translate biographies. And actually, we had a very interesting one a few years ago, in which we were translating women's health issues. So any you choose thing related that was normally in English, the main articles were written in English, but didn't have translations. We worked with like hundreds of students translating it in many languages. This is one of the beauties of living in the UK and mostly in London, where you have this big international community. So we have students that spoke every single language, and they all join us on International Women's Day to translate. And the sense of community on those days was really, really incredible. And I think we can have a new hackathon, editing hackathon next 8th of March. Pandemic living, please.
Thanks for that question, Brahim. Sandeep, do you have a last question?
No, Nigel, no, I have no question, but I'm interested in working in any education project with Dr.
Sorry, I lost the audio sometimes.
Yes, Sandeep, I think you cut
I have
out
no
a little
question.
bit.
I said I have no question, but I'm interested in doing any education project.
Me?
Okay.
Yeah.
But I keep doing education projects. Now we're working on a new framework on data literacy. We're trying to update our framework on data literacy. We're working with two colleagues, Dani and Victoria, and working on that. And actually, we are going to be working with UNESCO in developing a kind of framework for capacity building in open education, and open data will be, or like data literacy will be part of such framework. And this is a project that it's coming up with the UNESCO Coalition for Open Education. So yeah, this is kind of the main projects I'm involved, apart from teaching, which is like takes half my life.
It's interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandeep. Those are really good things for us to follow. The OER recommendation is, we're constantly trying to find ways to implement the recommendation and providing resources and training opportunities, I think is one of the key strategies. Well, thank you so much, Javiera. I wonder if you want to share some action items for our community. Where can they follow you? Is there anything they can get involved with? And I know you're also teaching in the Masters of Open Education program. So maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I teach. I have the pleasure of the honor of teaching in a Master's in Open Education practice in the University of Nova Gorica. So if anyone wants to get a master's in this field, just let me know. And also, let me try to find this for here. Just trying to pass some information. My colleague Leo, it's collecting data for his PhD. So here is, if you work in higher education, and I'm going to share this with you. This is his message. So if you work in higher education and if you're interested in open education policy, please fill his survey. And Nicole and all the group, if you can share it with your community of educators, that would be great. I'll have a slide about the survey at the end of my presentation, which I will be sharing with you by email in a couple of minutes.
Wonderful. We are putting this in the chat on the YouTube live now, so people will be able to. Oh, it's telling me there's too many characters. Okay, I'm gonna edit it in a second, and I'll share it in the chat on the YouTube live with the link, and then we'll follow up with the slides in the mailing list. So those of you who haven't signed up yet for the mailing list, we can include the link to sign up for that in the YouTube live chat as well. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. We've seen some comments in the chat that it was really helpful for people to think more about what they can do in their communities and their classrooms. We've had folks from all over the world tuning in today. I saw from Mexico, from Poland, Brazil. I see one of our community members from Ghana, so really from everywhere. And so this conversation will have a wide reach, and we just really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, no, thanks so much for the invitation, and I hope I can join as a listener and on the next round. So I'll keep an eye on your activities. But
Wonderful.
Yeah, for those like me finishing the academic year or the school year, good luck with the last 3 or 4 weeks that we still have to take on. So, and everyone have a lovely summer, or take care of yourself if you are like preparing for winter.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.